All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. So, full disclosure, I do the laundry in our house. It's an odd way to start a presentation on leisure by talking about one of the most boring, terrible chores anyone has to do. However, as I think about doing laundry, this is actually one of my most optimistic points of the year. It's that dawning of that sweet spot in central New York where the snow melts, the sun comes out, and just for about 2 weekends I can put laundry on the line outside and it gets to smell really nice and fresh. And it's fantastic. And it's weird that I'm so excited about that. But hey, it's how I function, I guess. So as I'm talking today and talking about airing leisure's dirty laundry, it comes from a place of genuine enthusiasm for laundry. It doesn't really, but hey, we'll stick with that for now. And so what I want us to think about is our lives as a collection of laundry. Shared experiences, memories, good times. And when we do laundry, when I do laundry, I sort through that laundry and I do it in different batches and different groups and these kinds of things. And just as we sort our own experiences to make sense of them, so society sorts those experiences too, and it starts to sort out leisure and our leisure experiences. And it starts to dictate to us how we understand what's appropriate leisure, what's inappropriate leisure, and what we can do for fun and what we shouldn't do for fun, and what we can tell people we think is fun, and things we should never tell people that we think is fun. Okay? And as we go through this talk, we'll kind of talk more about the systems that are in place that keep that happening. And so I'm going to start with a simple story of double Dutch. Again, I'm really jumping around, right? No, good, okay, the dad jokes are free. Okay? So, story of double Dutch. During the 70s and 80s, across urban America, double Dutch and jump rope really provided a soundtrack to summer. The rhythmic slap of rope on pavement told a story. It was a space where communities could come together, could have shared experiences, develop friendships. Towards the end of the 1980s, things started to change. Increasingly, police were enforcing ordinances around crowd sizes and gatherings in these communities. Noise ordinances were being put into place to break these groups up. And as that was happening, we started to see a decline in the prevalence of double Dutch in those communities. Simultaneously, competitive jump rope was taking off across suburban environments predominantly participated in by white Americans, and it was being recognized as a sport, as a competitive activity for engagement by people who could afford that access. And as we see this kind of process in action, we have to start to ask ourselves questions about what does this say about legitimacy of activity, about who has the right to participate, and what should participation look like for people across our society. Before we go any further, though, I want to talk a little bit about leisure, because that's my job. If you open any textbook, and I'm happy Andy's in here, one of the first leisure textbooks I read was for his class. But any leisure textbook you open will start out with something along the lines of leisure consists of activities we freely choose to engage in our discretionary time, or words to that effect. But what is that freedom? I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you have ever played polo? And that's the game with the horses and the hammers. That is not the technical term for any of that. Well, the horse, yes, but not the hammer. I do know what a horse is. So, how many of you have ever played polo? Show of hands. That is about the usual response I get when I ask that question in my 200 level diversity class. Okay. How many of you have ever thought about playing polo? One, yes. If I had prizes, two, kind of like that. Oh, three, okay, all right, getting confident now. Okay. It's an odd question, Liz. No? Okay. Why does that matter? Because if we say you have complete freedom to choose your leisure, think about why you've never thought about doing polo. And there's lots of reasons why that's the case. One of them is your social position. Social position determines where you feel welcome or whether you will be welcome. Consider also your economic status. I don't have money for a stable full of horses. There's a reason they call polo the sport of kings. Think also about your cultural background. I wasn't raised in a community where horses were prevalent. It was not likely I was ever going to do polo. Think also about your other identity markers. Your age, your gender, your race, your ability status. All of those things help determine how much choice and freedom you have to choose the leisure in which you participate. And so, what actually is represented as this wide choice of complete freedom and autonomy, by the time society has done its thing, is actually much reduced. And on this presentation, pretty much invisible. In understanding some of the power structures that are at work here, turning to the work of Gareth Stedman Jones. And he talked about capitalist rationality in leisure and really drove the idea that in order to understand leisure choices, we have to look at it through a capitalist lens. What is commercially viable? Why do we choose the activities we choose? How do market forces affect what is appropriate for us to participate in versus what is inappropriate? And a lot of it comes down to what is marketable. I'm going to share a couple of examples. I'm going to start with skateboarding. How many of you have skateboarded? You see? All right. So skateboarding in the 80s and 90s was predominantly engaged in urban youth. It was a low-cost activity, often involving trespassing, getting into empty pools to use the sides, or skating on library steps. You know how city government loves it when you skateboard on their stairs, okay? And so because of that, cities put in place ordinances. They enforced rules about where people could skateboard. And where they couldn't stop people, they redesigned the architecture to make sure that people couldn't skateboard. Those little nubs that you see on top of a lot of walls, they're not there for decoration. They're there to stop people skateboarding. And yet today, skateboarding is an Olympic sport. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the award winners at the conference was a municipality that had just built a multi-million-dollar skate park. The activity is exactly the same, but what has changed is the profitability of it. Because now we have celebrities like Tony Hawk that we can market. We have Olympic branding, we have the X Games. And this causes interesting subcultures within this activity. Another activity is lowrider culture. And going back to the 1950s, we saw the rise of hot rod culture, celebrated as car enthusiasm among white teenagers. When Latinos and Chicano populations started lowrider culture, the same basic thing, modifying vehicles, showing enthusiasm, rather than being met as a positive social experience, they were met by enforcement of gathering rules and ordinances again. Same basic activity, different group got different response. Even basketball. How many of you have been watching March Madness? Right? NBA, one of the most popular sports in the US. Yeah, in urban environments, we see, once again, very similar patterns. courts being removed, police surveilling participants in those games, noise ordinances. In fact, it's the double Dutch story being played out again and again. And while these provide some illustration, think also about some of the other means that these kind of decisions are made. For example, in the 1950s and 60s, segregation along race lines in public pools. Very obvious, very clear to us today looking back historically. Today, a more salient example may well be the economic segregation that can be attached to travel leagues that cost thousands of dollars for parents to get their kids into in the hope that maybe they'll get a place in a college team and get a scholarship. Okay, if you can afford it, it's an opportunity, but if you can't, it's not there. And so that's one set of power systems. And they all intersect. And when we're looking at intersections, we're really building on the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, and particularly in terms of leisure, Scranton and Watson. And they started to look at this through these intersecting ideas about how different identities actually make a difference to how we view leisure. And the first example they gave was hip hop. When we take hip hop classes in a suburban gym, it's great exercise, it's cultural exchange, cultural engagement. But when youth in an urban environment participate in hip hop at a local community center or in an open public urban space, it's a problem behavior. It needs to be restricted and controlled. Same activity, but because of a different class, different race, different location, it's a problem. How many of you play video games? Okay, you didn't expect to get such a workout today, did you? Right? Gaming culture. Gaming culture is fascinating on lots of levels. I study aberrance and deviance in recreation, and it's a fascinating space. Watson and Scranton's work really focused on female gamers and the layered marginalization that they face being in a predominantly male space, being considered less talented gamers purely because of their sex. And when they meet harassment and they raise issues, they're then considered to be deviant within that population. We don't raise these concerns, you're just overreacting. I'm sure that sounds familiar to many of you. And lastly, parkour, or free running. Parkour and free running really developed in primarily Paris, is associated today. But in urban centers, this is the true epitome of an urban activity. You need the built environment to do it. However, even though that as an activity, you can see it in Bond movies and action films, okay? Even with that being said, this was all moved to urban gyms and urban spaces that cost a lot of money. And people doing parkour on the streets is illegal and trapped down. It's trespassing, it's a violation of code, and all of these kinds of things. And what does this actually mean to us? I asked earlier about polo. It's really about this social norm. What do people like us do? That's what a social norm is. What do people like you do? I don't know. I can't answer that. What does a professional do? How many of you play golf? Okay. If I asked that question in a different culture, I would probably get a very different set of hands. Growing up, golf was not something that I was going to be doing. Grew up in a working class, government subsidized housing. Golf was not for me. Okay? Understanding how these social norms affect our leisure choices matters, because it determines so much about how we feel about activities and how we provide and message those activities to other people. And this becomes important in terms of our ability to improve the system. Recreation professionals use a lot of data. They look at who attends their programs, they try to build programs that are going to attract people. Community providers use that data to build skate parks. Okay? And they look to the audience participation, right? Their participants to provide evaluations and feedback. The thing is, if we're not active and engaged in that system, or if we just assume that because we do it, everyone's okay doing it, then we're really missing a big part of it. Okay, a part of that conversation. And a major part of the conversation is asking the question, why? Why have I sorted my leisure choices the way I have? College gave me great opportunities to do things I would never have done had I not gone to college. And I'm sure that's true for many of you. But the why is really important. We have to understand those systems and how they sort us so that we can do a better job. And so I started out with Double Dutch, and I asked you questions about your polo participation. It's unfortunate we won't be able to build a polo team out of this group, but I'll keep trying, okay? And I asked those questions, and I've shared these examples to really get you thinking about why do you think the things you think about the way we spend our free time. I ask my students this in the classes I teach quite often, because it often says more about them than it does about the activity which they're judging. And through this conversation, I hope that I've brought some air and some fresh air and some light to your thinking about leisure, because it's a really powerful form of social control, but it's also a really powerful form of social control and interaction that we actually have a pretty important say in how when our kids, when our friends, when our communities want to engage in activities, we can stand up and speak and advocate for people who maybe don't have a voice and who aren't able to do that for themselves. Thank you. Have a good evening.